Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Marcelo Gleiser, and I have the honor and the pleasure of helping and hosting my friend Adam Frank, who has this wonderful book out now called The Little Book of Aliens, which in my blurb I say it's not little at all. It has wonderful things to say about this absolutely fascinating question. So, what we're going to do is we are going to discuss a little bit about some of the beginnings of the book, how the book came about, and then we'll go into some more detailed questions. And hopefully, the last 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to reserve for questions that have been asked by some of his readers. So, so that's the plan. So, Adam, let's go right on because I know we have a ton of stuff to talk about. And the first one is aliens. It's something that obviously comes at least to us now from science fiction. And I've asked you this question before, and I think the readers would love to know what is it about science fiction that so motivates and enchants you?
Yeah, and my the whole career as an astronomer began with science fiction when I was a kid, when I was literally 5 years old. And I have this memory burned into my mind. My dad was a writer, and he loved science fiction. And I remember as a kid coming into his office in his library, and there was a whole shelf full of 1960s, 1950s um, uh, pulp science fiction magazines, like Amazing Science, those kinds of things. And every one of them had a cover, like a lurid illustrated cover of guys bouncing around on the moon in Michelin Tire Man spacesuits, or rocket ships blasting off, or aliens, bug-eyed monsters, or other kinds of things. And I just that was it. And I was so gripped by those pictures that I remember asking him about it, and him explaining to my 5-year-old self what they were.
Mhm.
And that was it. That from that moment on, I knew I wanted to be an astronomer, and I knew I wanted to learn more about this. And then, as I got older, my dad kept putting science fiction books into my hand. He gave me
Mhm.
Dune when I was way too young, right? And then I discovered, Star Trek when I was a kid. They used to have Star Trek reruns going every day at 5 o'clock and at 7 o'clock. So I watched every possible Star Trek episode over and over again, everything else that existed. And so it was science fiction. And to this day, I'm still an avid science fiction reader. And some of my thinking, at least, about this topic comes from what I consider to be the best science fiction authors. They're quite good at doing, in some sense, what scientists can't do, which is narrate, sort of explore possibilities in a way that I think can be very useful for scientific thinking.
So, in the sci-fi literature, do you think that a lot of the science that we are doing or that has been done in the last, say, 5 decades, it's being inspired by some of the ideas that came first in fictional work,
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, no, it's actually amazing how much
right?
of that interplay happens. There's certain ways in which, just in general, right? The communicator in Star Trek was this source of cell phones, right? Those flip phones. But there are, really a bunch of key ideas. So one of those key ideas is the Dyson sphere, the idea that, an advanced civilization would wrap its star with a machine in some sense that could capture all of its energy. And that apparently shows up in Star Maker, a novel from the 30s. So, in many ways, or the idea, Isaac Asimov in Foundation, the idea of a galactic empire, right? That civilization spanning the galaxy and how they might evolve and what kinds of technology they might develop. Those were very influential for the field, especially, like with Kardashev, when Kardashev was thinking about his different levels of civilization, this idea of how advanced might a civilization get, and would it be observable? That's what the astronomers were interested in. Would a civilization of a particular scale of resources, harvesting resources, would that be observable, and how? So that really affected the early days of SETI.
And then, since you touched on it so early already, so we have to talk about this a little more. Techno signatures. So one of the things, because there are many ways in which this conversation can go, right? So, but let's go with the intelligent alien first, right? So the notion that they do exist. First of all, let's we can
Make
qualify
that
how
jump.
exactly, and that being the case, if they develop civilizations, which I know is a super interesting topic for you. Um, first of all, how can we see that? What kind of detection that we here on Earth or with our machines we can expect to see from that?
Yeah, and that's a lot of what this book is about. The reason I wrote this book was, after 30 years of being an astronomer, uh, I, turned to astrobiology because of all of the amazing things that were happening. And, what I really want people to understand is that for the first time, really, we have a way of finding civilizations, finding alien civilizations that doesn't require, them like sending beacons to us or trying to communicate with us, which is really what a lot of the original SETI was.
Yeah.
And that was basically because that was the only way people could even do it. But now, because of the exoplanet revolution, because we've discovered that every star in the sky has planets orbiting it, we've developed techniques to actually see into the atmospheres of those planets, and we can find the imprint in light of a technological civilization. So a techno-signature is literally a signature, an imprint in the light of, say, something like industrial chemicals, right? So if the civilization's either by mistake or on purpose pumping chemicals that nature wouldn't produce into the atmosphere, we can see those from 40 light years away, and that becomes a techno-signature. It's something that's going to show us that, oh my God, there is a civilization there going about its work, right? Going about its business of civilizationing. We don't need anymore for the alien or for the civilization to care about us, right? We can now, just like detectives, sit there with our cold cups of coffee and our donuts and just look for them going about their own business. So that's really the revolution that I'm trying to explore and show people in the book, that we're ready. Like, we have the technology now, and it's only going to get better in the next few decades to find signatures of technological civilizations.
So if alien astronomers were looking at us right now, right, and they had similar or probably a little better technology, because I work on these biosignatures from atmospheres,
Right.
and the James Webb is beginning to scratch the surface of that, which is
Yeah.
super exciting. But the question is, assuming they have better technology, right, and they are looking at us just like we are looking at them, what would be the telltale sign from their perspective to say, "Oh, look at that planet there in that solar system. Something
Right.
very
Right.
interesting is going on." What do you think would be like the
Yeah. That's a great question, because it speaks to, right, the capacities we're about to have over the next 10, 20, 30 years, or maybe even 100 years. But really within 20 years, with the Habitable World Observatory, which is the next, what's going to come after the James Webb Space Telescope, we will have some of these capacities. So if somebody was looking at us, and there was just a really great paper by Vicki Meadows of the University of Washington that explored exactly this question, actually used data from, actually data from satellites that looking at the Earth. So what could they see? What are our techno-signatures? If they have good enough telescopes, they could see city lights. They would be able to see that there's artificial illumination on the night side of the Earth. They would definitely be able to see, because we just wrote a paper on this, they would definitely be able to see chlorofluorocarbons in our atmosphere. So, CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, are these chemicals that, we produced for air conditioning and spray cans, and they almost ate a hole in the ozone. But, they're still up there. And right now, even with the JWST, we're right at the hairy edge of being able to detect them in a planet that was 40 light years away. So aliens 40 light years away would also be able to see us. If they had powerful enough radio receivers, right? We have the solar system is full of techno-signatures, not just on Earth, right? We have probes on Mars that are sending radio signals back to us. We have 5 space probes that have left the solar system, and they're still communicating with radio. So if you had a really, really powerful radio detector, you might be able to get the faint hiss from the Voyager space probe. So we're already pumping out techno signatures for a really advanced civilization to be able to find. So yeah, Earth is already visible in techno signatures.
So that's awesome. So I want to go back to a more basic question, which is, all right, so you wrote a book about aliens, and why did you do it now?
Yeah, that's because now is the moment. I think what people really need to understand, and maybe don't recognize, especially because of all the hubbub about UFOs and UAPs, is that science, right? That the scientific search for aliens is so much further along than our ability to even try and answer the UAP or UFO question with science. That the telescopic search for aliens is we're ready, like we're there, we're pushing the boats into the water and starting this journey. And I wanted to give people a way to see how far along we are and to give them all the history they need so that when somebody announces, hey, we think we found aliens, they can be part of the ride, right? They would have everything they needed to know to be able to evaluate the claims that someone would make. And even more than that, I wanted to, some of the book is just about, well, what would aliens be like? How can we use the science we have to go further and, extrapolate to ask, what are alien minds like? What are alien bodies like? How can we use the theory of evolution to at least say something about how on other planets evolution might shape the structure of creatures? So I wanted people to know how amazing astrobiology is and how much this is the moment. Like really, finally, we're there after 2,500 years. We can answer this question.
That's fabulous, because that's exactly what we need right now. And what about we have to talk about this, which is dispelling UFOs and visitations and that the aliens built the pyramids. Can you tell us a little bit about all that and how you feel about this?
Yeah, so in the book, I trace, I look at the history of both, the scientific search for life and then also UFOs, because the whole UFO thing is so important because that's what got implanted in our minds. There's a chapter in the book where I talk about how, there's already been an alien invasion and they won, right? And it was all the stuff from science fiction and then UFOs, because that's what people think about when they think about aliens. And, the hard reality is that there is no data. There's no scientifically verifiable data that, someone like me or someone like you could work with that links UFO phenomena with the presence of aliens, right? And that's just the reality. I mean, I'm sure that'll make some people angry, but, people often say, oh, you scientists, you're so close-minded. But actually, we're very open-minded. I just I'm in the middle of writing a paper actually about how if aliens visited the moon 1 billion years ago, would anything they left still be visible? The problem with the UFO stuff is that, as you know, we scientists have really brutal expectations about how a piece of data is going to be linked to a claim, especially an extraordinary claim like there's life in the universe. And up to now, the data associated with UFOs, there's nothing you can do with it. Michael Turner, who you know very well, once said to me that in science, a good theory or a good idea, you put a quarter in and you get $1 out, right? Mm-hmm. And the problem with UFO stuff, there's nothing I could use to take the next step, right? With science, it's always the next step. And the stories that people have, and again, I could never tell somebody, if somebody says they saw something, what can I say? I wasn't there. But in terms of public knowledge, there's nothing with UFOs that will help us take the next step. Now, what's good is that now NASA's gotten involved. There are these, the government reports, and, I'm all for having an open, transparent, agnostic scientific study of UFOs and UAPs. And, we would see where that goes. One of the beautiful things about science is it teaches you how to change your mind. But at this point, the UFOs is a lot of blobby photos, a lot of personal stories, some of which are, really compelling and raise the hair on the back of your neck, and hoaxes and conspiracy theories. So right now, there's nothing for a scientist like you or I to really work with, because the same standards of evidence are going to apply to you and I as we say, oh, we think we found something, have to apply to the UFOs. There's not like a special kind of science that only applies to UFOs.
And you know that one of the first stories of abduction was here in New Hampshire. So
That's right.
So people don't know, but I'm a professor at Dartmouth and I'm speaking from Hanover in New Hampshire. And it was this couple that was driving through some, mountain road, and then the lights came, and then suddenly, they saw, or they had a very direct contact with aliens, so that was the story. But okay, so taking that all with a grain of salt, and also let's put a little bit of science into this, which is the difficulties of interstellar travel. I think everyone should know a little bit more about that. So can you tell us a little bit about, okay, what's the reality that we know of with the science that we know now, obviously, about interstellar travel?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, one of the things, when I talk to the UFO community, and I've really enjoyed some of the discussions I've had with people, like Ryan Graves, one of the pilots who, the UFO, the pilots who had the encounter. And it was great because he's very agnostic. He's like, look, I saw this, it didn't behave like any flight, any aircraft I'd ever seen. Can you guys explain it? That's where he's coming from. And so, anybody, whether you're interested in aliens as a scientific study, alien life, or if you're interested in the future of humanity, you've got to deal with the science of how do you cross interstellar distances. And I think people, unless you work with it, the mind-boggling, the mind-melting distances between the stars is really hard to wrap your mind around. It's just the distances between the stars are so vast that it's really hard to understand, just to feel it in some sense. And so when we think about that, we have to deal with the speed of light being constant. This is just built into the structure of reality in the physics that we understand. So if the speed of light really is a limit, and that's entirely possible, that nothing can go faster than the speed of light, then you're stuck with trying to get yourself up to the speed of light. And there are ways you can do that are maybe with solar sails or sails that are driven by powerful lasers. There's ideas about that right now. You might be able to get up to very close to the speed of light, which means if you wanted to go to a planet 40 light years away, it would take you 40 years, right? But, okay, so maybe you have hypersleep, maybe that's possible. Or you do a century ship where you have one or two generations, live and die, and then the next generation is born in the ship. So those are kind of the possibilities if light speed really is a limit. Then you get things you can imagine, okay, what if there's a way around the speed of light? And as you know, Einstein's theory of relativity tells us that sure, nothing can move faster through space than the speed of light, but it's possible to bend space and to warp space. So there's the possibility of using wormholes, which are ways of taking space, different parts of space, bringing them together and being able to jump across them. Or warp drives, which also use the idea of warping space and moving, having a bubble of space-time that moves at whatever speed you want. The great thing, so these are great ideas, really interesting. There's even the Akubre drive, right? Mikhail Akubre, I think that's his name, worked out the general relativity of what a warp drive would look like. But as I talk about in the book, the problem is, I think it's negative energy, right? Exotic matter, exotic energy, which is you need this stuff called right, which has negative pressure. It's basically an anti-gravity kind of stuff, and you can put that into the equations, and you can get really interesting stuff. But there's no evidence that anything like that exists. It's just literally you're taking the equations and playing with them and being like, oh, if I stick this term here with a minus sign, I get the right result. So, that's the problem with warp drives. And then finally, there's quantum mechanics. And, quantum mechanics is so weird. Who knows? Like maybe there's some, infinite improbability drives that could work.
So one of my heroes in sci-fi is Arthur C. Clarke, right? And he had a wonderful quote that said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? And I think that's the argument that a lot of people are going to use. Say, look, guys, you have been doing science for 400 years. We are already sending probes beyond the solar system, which is kind of like remarkable for only 400 years. Imagine if we had 1,000,000 years, what could happen, right? And that is very kind of hypothetical stuff that we could be thinking about, that it could perhaps create different sorts of ways of traveling through space. But as it is now, if we're using our current technologies, right, to say go to Alpha Centauri, right, which is only about 4.5 light years from us,
right,
it would take us almost 100,000 years to get there,
right,
which is kind of depressing.
Yeah, right. And the thing that's interesting about, I kind of push back on Arthur C. Clarke's that idea, because what we do have is really amazing physics. Now, there may be other physics, but as you know, when Einstein came along, he didn't just say, oh, Newton, that's it, we're never going to use Newton again. Einstein sat on top of Newton, and everything that Newton ever showed, Einstein had to recover. So we have a lot of amazing physics, and no matter what the aliens do, it's got to match with, down at the bottom with the physics we do understand. So that means you can't just wave your hands and say like, oh, they figured something out, because whatever they do still has to be compatible, like the second law of thermodynamics, for example, which nobody thinks you can replace or overcome. So, no matter what we do, we're going to have to match with the physics we understand or extrapolate the physics we understand. And that means that you can't just wave your hands. You have to engage with the science. And that's what's really fun, right? That's when it gets really fun. So,
Yeah. So to quote another big one, so Michael Faraday, one of the inventors of electromagnetism, said something like, "Nothing is impossible as long as it obeys the laws of physics or the laws of nature."
right,
Right. So
right,
that
right.
is a very important constraint that people need to. So talking about weird stuff like that, and because of we talked about interstellar travel, what about Roswell?
Yeah, yeah. So I deal with Roswell in the book, and
I'm
what I
sure.
try and show people is that if there's ever, because people are like, well, why don't scientists engage with this? Why are scientists leaving it alone? And you look at the history of Roswell, and for my part, I read a bunch of books on it, and I couldn't make heads or tail of it because every book had a different story, and there's 2 crashed spaceships in one, and there's 3 crashed spaceships in the other, and Eisenhower's looking at the bodies in one, and it was just and then there's these hoaxes about the alien autopsy, which was this show in the 1990s,
Yeah.
which turned out to be a complete hoax. It was supposed to be the body, a film of the autopsy of the Roswell bodies. And it's about standards of evidence, right? So, in science, we have these really rigid standards of evidence that are brutal, right? You have to stand up and defend your ideas and your proof in front of 10 people who are way smarter than you, right? And they're going to skewer you. And you can see with Roswell that anything counted as evidence. And it was my brother's sister's cousin's uncle's aunt's hairdresser knew somebody who talked to somebody who saw the and so that really it's the example of why scientists have stayed away from it, because who wants to? Science takes a long time, right? And it takes years to engage in a subject and really do research about it. And you're not going to engage in something that just has so much of the conspiracy theory going on, and so much of the stuff that it's even hard to know where to start. And so if we're going to look at UFOs and UAPs, we got to look to the future. We don't want to relitigate the past. And let's try and do an actual scientific study of it and see where it leads. But you can just look at the past and see why scientists have avoided this subject, because there's nowhere to bite into, and it's like a fog.
Yeah, I think it was Carl Sagan that said something. So these aliens have this incredible technology, so they're capable of going across interstellar distances, and here they are flying over, the American Southwest, and they are shot down by a jet fighter from the 1940s or early 50s, from the
Yeah,
American Air Force. Really? So
yeah,
that's sort of like,
yeah.
anyways.
Or they're struck by lightning,
Or
And so,
struck
right,
by
it's like
lightning, is that the other
yeah,
one?
and so it's like the aliens are sending us their 1986 Dodge Omnis, right? Like all their craft that can cross the incredible dangers of interstellar space and then fall apart when they get here. It's the same thing. I talk about the high beam argument in the book, where it's like, because one of the real problems with the logic of what happens with UFOs is like, well, they're here. They don't want to land on the White House lawn and say, hey, we're announcing ourselves. So they want to stay hidden, but they suck at it, right? They, like if they want to be hidden, turn off the lights, because I saw lights in the sky. Turn off the lights. And so this is the problem with the consistent, if we're going to do science, we need to build coherent, systematic, cogent, logical arguments to understand what's going on. And it's that kind of thing that makes it difficult or defies that narrative. And so that's why we don't engage with it. We're trying to build, even if we're going to deal with UFOs and UAPs, we're still going to have to do it as scientists, which means assessing probabilities, determining ranges of parameters for speeds and for material strengths. So the Roswell is just an example of why scientists don't engage with it, because it just would seem like a lot of waste of our time when there's other subjects that we love, that we want, including aliens, that we want to spend our time doing.
Yeah, no, that's right. But to me, what's really fascinating is, why does it hold such a tremendous amount of space in popular culture? What is it, in your opinion, about aliens that is so compelling to so many people?
Yeah, and in that question is where I think all of us, whether you're really into UFOs, or whether you're interested in UFOs but you're skeptical about them, and scientists, we all agree it's the most it's the oldest question that humanity, one of the oldest questions humanity's ever asked. You can see, in the book I talk about Democritus and Aristotle kind of beating each other up over it. People have been asking this question since we've been able to ask questions. It's the possibility, the problem with being human is we're lonely, right? We have these ideas about the world. We have these ideas about ourselves. And there's no one to talk to except other human beings. And human beings are so mean and nasty to each other. Like, you look at our history, you got to wonder, like, is there anything else? Is there anything better? Does anybody do a better job? But even life itself, you don't even have to deal with intelligent aliens. Life, and I talk about this in the book a lot. Life is so different from non-life. Now, this is something Marcelo and I know because we're working on a project together using information theory to try and understand what makes living systems different from non-living systems. So a cell is so much weirder than even a black hole that you got to wonder, is our lonely planet the only place it's ever happened? Is life just an accident that only happened in this world? Or is life common? Does any world that has the right ingredients have life form? Because if that's true, then all bets are off, right? Because life is so creative and so innovative, unlike anything else, any non-living example of a system, that if there's a lot of life in the universe, then wow, man, who knows where its inventiveness and its creativeness has taken the universe, right?
Okay, so now you touched on a super interesting point, which is our cosmic loneliness or not, right?
Right.
And in 1960, I think Frank Drake came up with his equation, which of course I think you talk about a lot in the book, where he tried to quantify what are the necessary things that need to happen in order for, in his case, he was interested in galactic intelligent civilizations, right? But you can parse the different bits of the equation, and I think it would be really interesting for people to know at least what the Drake equation is about, and how that connects to the Fermi paradox. Because I think these are things that float around, the popular culture, both of those things. I'm like, okay, what's there? What can we say now about these two things? And looking forward, what do you think we can improve?
Well, that's why I included him in the book, right? Because, if we're getting very close to having some kind of data that's relevant to the question of life, whether it's dumb life, microbes, or smart life, intelligent civilizations, there's so much history that, whether you're interested in UFOs or not, this is all the relevant history for thinking about life in the universe. So what Drake did in 1960, he'd already done his first search using radio telescopes, and he actually got a call from the government saying, hey, would you host a meeting on interstellar communications, right? So what he actually did, he was trying to, this is the first time this has ever been talked about in science, so he was trying to draft an agenda for the meeting. What are we going to talk about? And this is what was so important about what he did. He took the problem, is intelligent life common? Which is hard to even wrap your mind. How are you going to study that scientifically? And he broke it up into 7 sub-problems. One was, how many stars are there? The second was, how many stars have planets? The third was, how many of those planets are in the right place for life to form? Then, how many of those planets that are in the right place for life to form does life actually form? What's the probability of forming life? Then, what's the probability that some of that life goes on to form intelligence? Then, what is the probability that some of that intelligence creates technological civilizations? And then finally, the one that really matters for us, what about the lifetime? How long, on average, do civilizations last? And the reason the Drake equation has been so important is it was a research program, right? Mm-hmm. That big number at the end, you put all of those terms together and you get how many intelligent civilizations there were in the galaxy. But, going for that is hard. We could first start with how many stars there are and how many planets are. And so now what's amazing is when Drake did that, only one of those 7 terms was known. Yeah. Now the first 3, all the astronomical terms have been nailed. So he gave us a way of formulating the problem. He gave us a research program, which we have pursued. And now we're on F sub I, the fraction of planets that have life at all. That's the next thing that we're going to be shooting for. So that's the Drake equation and why it's so important, because it still guides what we're doing. And then there's Fermi paradox, right? And what's cool about Fermi and Drake, they bracket the 1950s, right? The 1950s is where we went from everybody yelling at each other to the beginnings of formulating scientific questions you could actually answer. So the Fermi paradox, basically, the great story is, Fermi and his buddies are walking to lunch, and there was a cartoon in the New Yorker magazine that sort of it had UFOs in it, right? Was because this is already 1950. UFOs started in 1947. The craze about them. And so, it's Fermi and a bunch of other scientists, and they start this conversation about interstellar travel and what would involve in it. And then they kind of drop it, go on to other problems. And then in the middle of lunch, like an hour later, Fermi just blurts out in his typical Fermi way, where are they? But where are they? Because what he'd done is he instantly saw that even if the speed of light is, the limit, that a spacefaring race that was moving at, say, a tenth of the speed of light could hop from one star system to the other, making a settlement, going to the next one, making a settlement, going to the next one, in a timescale that was very short compared to the age of the galaxy. So it would take about 600,000 years, I think, at a tenth of the speed of light, which seems like a long time, but the galaxy's, 10 billion years or more old. So he saw that. The question was, why aren't they here now? Like, why don't we have evidence of aliens right now? Why haven't they announced themselves? And so that was the Fermi paradox. What he was saying was, if intelligent life is common, they should be here already. Now, the important thing about that was that kind of morphed into another paradox where people said, once SETI started getting going, people started to have this idea that every night astronomers were using their radio telescopes to search the stars for signals of intelligent life. So this is what we call the indirect Fermi paradox. The direct is, why aren't they here right now? And the problem, and so that's where the great silence came from. People started, coming up with the idea like, well, we've looked and we haven't heard anything. Therefore, there's no intelligent life in the universe. The problem with that is it's just wrong, right? Because we've never looked, or we've barely looked, right? There was never any money because of what we call the giggle factor. SETI never had funding that really amounted to anything. So Jason Wright, who is a great astrobiologist, did a study where, based on work that Jill Tarter had done, where he looked at all of the parameter space that has actually been searched, the SETI parameter space. And if you think of that space as being like the ocean, how much of it have we actually searched? And it turns out to be a hot tub. So far we have searched a hot tub worth of the ocean that we need to search for intelligent life. And if you looked at a hot tub's worth of water and didn't find any fish, it wouldn't make sense to go, well, that's it. There's no fish in the ocean. So that's why the Fermi paradox is so important. And the Fermi paradox and the Drake equation, they were the archetype, the beginnings of the formulation of this scientific problem.
There's this other important technical aspect to the SETI, which is, if you're listening to radio waves, they're being beamed by some distant civilization, you have to choose the frequency that you're listening at, just like when you're tuning into a radio, 98.5, river, rock, whatever, and you say, that's the one I want to. So the big question is, okay, what is the frequency or frequencies that you're going to choose in order to detect some activity out there far away in the universe from other intelligences? And that's like a big question mark, right? Because we know nothing of their psychology or what it is. What kind of music are they listening? What kind of frequency do they beam in? And so there are many assumptions that are made to search for those. You may want to make, if you want to comment on that, that would be interesting.
Well, just that's why, like, classics SETI. So when in the late 80s, there was a professor who worked on SETI at the University of Washington, where I was getting my degree. And I loved talking with him. Woody Sullivan, great guy, really clever, innovative, interesting. But one of the things SETI then really was sort of based on the idea that somebody's sending us a signal. And they needed to, because in order, the power required, if you were beaming it, in 100, everywhere in space, was so big that it just didn't make any sense. So, if you beam something at someone, you can concentrate the power. And so that's one of the reasons why at that point, SETI, I thought it was interesting. I was so happy people were doing it, but it's still, that assumption always bothered me. But now with technosignatures, we don't have to do that anymore. Like, we're still doing SETI. That's great. And machine learning has really revolutionized classic SETI. But to me, classic SETI is now part of this larger field of technosignatures, where we don't have to care whether they're interested in talking to us. We don't have to make any assumptions that they want to communicate. We can just, like I said, like detectives, sit there with our cold coffee and donuts and just watch them. We can look and stare at alien planets and just look for them going about their business. That's the revolution.
Yeah. And, it's fair to say that as of now, we have zero evidence of other life of any kind out there, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's the truth, right?
that's the truth.
And there are people that are saying, well, maybe it's just because we're looking at the wrong place. Because I think people should understand that when we're talking about life, looking for life elsewhere, we're talking about life as we know it. And I think if you want to make the distinction, between life as we know it and life as we do not know it, I think there is a
Right.
new initiative from NASA now about, okay, what could be the chemical biosignatures of life as we don't know it? Because that's a very big question. So, what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's the right way to go. And I think we now have the tools. We've evolved in both biosignatures and technosignatures from sort of like thinking about what we've done and how life on Earth has formed to trying to be agnostic. That's the new word, agnostic biosignatures and technosignatures, where you just try and look for things that life would do no matter what. Right, you don't have to worry. Like you don't have to wonder whether or not they have DNA or they're carbon based. That we can really open it up and use very general principles. I know you've worked on this. Your student Sarah Walker, I think, is one of the who's really doing interesting work on this. So people should understand that we're not just thinking about carbon based life. We're using the principles of science to ask more generally, what does anything that we call life? What would it produce that we might be able to observe?
Yeah. On the other hand, there are good reasons to use carbon, right? Because
Yeah, true,
and
absolutely,
water, right?
absolutely,
I mean,
right.
so life is so incredibly creative and resilient that it kind of takes advantage of this very, very efficient way of connecting organic molecules with carbon and solvent as water. But you know what? I can see that we're beginning to run out of time, and I wanted to ask some questions that are coming from your readers.
That'd be great.
So yeah, I thought that would be so. Carrie from Washington says, and I think that's a good one. Is there a main theme you want your readers to take away from your book?
The main theme I want readers to take away the book is excitement that this is happening, right? That after decades, centuries, millennia of just people arguing, we're really going to have data now, and we're really going to have what we need for answers. And so in the book, it's about how we're going to get those answers, and it's also about what those answers might look like, including, like I said, alien minds, what those might be like, and why it matters. So I really want people to understand, as I say in the book, suit up, right? Because we're on. The game is on. So yeah, I think that's the main one I really want people to understand and come away from the book with.
But I think we should also maybe tell people that in the highest probability, if we find anything, is that it's not going to be intelligent life. It's going to be probably simple life. Do you have any points about that?
No, I don't. So Jason, right, our NASA team, we wrote a paper showing that like technosignatures may be far more prevalent and far more unambiguous than biosignatures. So yeah, we wrote a whole paper on really there's reasons to argue that technosignatures, because one civilization can produce zillions of technosignatures that leave the planet. Right? We now have, there's human technosignatures all over the solar system, including those that have left. So it's not clear which one is going to be, which one we should expect.
So, okay. So from an observational perspective, it may be easier, you're claiming, that to find technosignatures than perhaps like some biological activity in some atmosphere.
Well, even from a theoretical perspective, because, the thing about a technosphere, a civilization that develops technology can leave its home world. Biospheres can't do that. Biospheres don't reproduce. Right. Technospheres reproduce. So again, it's possible that, one example of a technological civilization can lead to technospheres and techno-civilizations everywhere in the galaxy.
Okay. This is a very good question from Tim in Michigan. If humans did find alien life, how do you think it would impact society and culture and law?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. And, I think the best, because people often say like, oh, it won't matter, especially if we find something that's 40 light years away, we can't visit it. But my response to that is, look at the Copernican revolution, right? We figured out that the Earth was going around the sun, not the other way around. Didn't change anything, right? It still looked like the sun was coming up in the morning. But in fact, the Copernican revolution transformed the whole of human culture, right? The Enlightenment, the Reformation, the Renaissance, the Copernican revolution, that idea was central. So if we find life elsewhere, I think it's going to really revolutionize and rewire how we think of ourselves in the universe.
Do you have thoughts as of why that's so important?
It's going to be important. One reason it's going to be important is because life is so different from non-life. To understand that we're part of a community, even if it's, it doesn't have to be civilizations, that we're part of a community, a galactic community of life. I think that blows open the doors of how we see ourselves. And if we do find civilizations, it also can offer hope that, that at least somebody makes it, because most civilizations that we find will probably be older than us. And so, that means that someone has managed to make it through.
Why don't we go over this? This is such an important topic that you just mentioned right now. And I think it's so crucial to this whole conversation, which is, okay, folks, us as humans, we are at a big crossroads in our history, because, we can go good, we can do okay, or we can really mess things up. Let's put it that way. And what Adam is saying here, which I think he should repeat and emphasize, and I'll just go first and then you just improvise and go over it, which is that if we do find technological civilizations out there in the galaxy, it tells us that it is possible for other civilizations to survive themselves, because
Right.
one of the explanations for the Fermi paradox is where is everybody? Is that, well, they're not here because every civilization that achieves a certain level of technology can self-destruct. So I think that is such an important point. And you wrote a paper about this, the different ways in which, can you maybe talk a little bit about that paper and how it fits into this big question of our collective future?
Yeah, the real question is, on Earth, we've seen the biosphere mature. We've seen over the billions of years of Earth's history that we started off with some life, here and there, microbes, and then eventually it took over the planet, and it managed to keep the planet habitable, especially, if you think about the Gaia hypothesis, keep the planet habitable for billions of years. We now have a technosphere, for sure. That's what climate change is about. But we don't have a mature technosphere. And in order to be able to survive for thousands, tens of thousands, millions of years, we need to figure out how to have a mature technosphere that doesn't wipe itself out.
Right. So if we find somebody out there, there's hope for us.
There's hope for us. I think that's really true. Just one example of a technological civilization shows us that that you can make it through.
Right. No, that's essential. So if you were to bet on the future, because I know everybody, and scientists hate to be prophets, because that's not usually a good idea. But would you say that, given the advances in our technology, detection and spectroscopy, from James Webb and from all these other new missions that are coming out, what do you think are the odds that in a decade or two we're going to actually have some signature that we can say, yep, this looks like there is life elsewhere?
Well, here's what I'll say with certainty. I feel that within 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to have data relevant to this question, like one way or the other. I feel absolutely confident of. Maybe we're going to find that all of these planets that we're looking at that we thought were habitable have no atmospheres, right? And they're all dead. That would tell us something. That's going to put a limit on things. Or, we're going to find things that look like biosignatures or technosignatures. So I really feel that over the next coming decades, we're going to have data. We're going to stop arguing, and we're going to actually be able to start putting probabilities or talking directly about, the signature that we found. So I feel pretty confident about that. That's why I wrote this book.
Right. So that's super exciting. What about us exploring, us being the colonizers of the galaxy? Do you see us doing that in the future?
I think that's a long time. Unless a scientific miracle happens, I think we're going to be in the solar system. We're going to colonize or settle every nook and cranny of the solar system for a long time. We may send robot probes out, but I think it's going to be a long time before we really are able to start establishing, bases on other planets orbiting other stars.
Yeah, because our home is awesome. I think it's important
Yeah,
to
it's a
remember
great home. Let's not mess with it.
that. Exactly. Okay, folks, I think we reached our time of 45 minutes, and I'd like to thank you all for being with us and spending this time, and congratulate Adam in this fascinating, wonderful book. I hope you inspire many kids, just like you have been inspired by your dad.
Yeah.
I hope this book is going to inspire many people to actually pay attention to the skies. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Marcelo. It was a great conversation. Thank you to everybody. I hopefully also be able to get to questions on Facebook. I'll try to do my best to answer them and engage everybody with conversation because it is super interesting and the questions are great. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Adam.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.